The content and material of your speech can be viewed much like the roots and the trunk of a tree. The branches, however, and the leaves and the blossoms are really about the language choices that you make. In this short lesson, we're going to look at linguistic style. If you remember Cicero's rhetorical canon, it had 5 components. First, we began with invention. Remember all that brainstorming to come up with a topic and the information that you would use according to the audience that you have and the information that's going to make it logical. Arrangement, that logical order or pattern for your speech. Then we had linguistic style, which is what we're going to talk about, language choices. Delivery, in other words, nonverbal, not only in your body, your gestures, but your vocal variety. And then finally, memory. How do we create memory within the speech? What are some strategies for that? So let's look at linguistic style. What are the language choices and how do we make those choices bloom or blossom so that we create a speech that is engaging and interesting and connects with our audience? Let's understand linguistic style to be the systematic pattern of language choices. And those choices of language can be unique to you as a speaker. In other words, they can show your personality, your background, based on the word choice that you use. Now, there are some things that we do have to make sure that we'll go into later, that we're following formal grammar and pronunciation and enunciation, but we do want to allow you the freedom to choose the words that are kind of indicative of your own personality, and that's called your signature. Also, this is about the word choice, the tense that we use, the sentence structure. All of those are stylistic choices that the speaker uses to create that style. And then we have to understand that language is not hard and fast. Words don't mean things. Words mean ideas, and words connect with people in different ways. They're arbitrary and symbolic. So understanding that the words that you use, as we are in a political season right now, if you listen to the word choices that politicians use, they're very strategic. They could use many words to convey the same meaning, but their choice of that word is very planned and basically artistic in a way that it's going to connect strategically with their audience, whether it's to create some kind of emotion or resonance with that audience. Let's look at 3 different types of linguistic style. Now, Cicero said that we have three different styles. And the first one is one that you used in your informative speech, and that is plain style. This is something that possibly you've got a technician and someone is teaching you how to do something. They're going to use very simple terms, very few complex passages, and they want to just convey straightforward information. That's a very plain style of speaking. Those words are not flowery or evoking emotion. Secondly, we have what is used more in persuasive speech. If we go back to understanding those politicians, you can see that depending on the personality, they can either use very plain language because they want to be seen as very straightforward, or they can use very grand or theatrical language that arouses emotion within an audience. And maybe the audience doesn't even understand what that speaker is saying, but there's some kind of charisma or emotion in the word choices that they're using that creates this theater around it. And so, unfortunately, audiences, we have to be critical consumers of those messages and realize what kind of linguistic style is that speaker using and for what purpose. And then we have mixed. So Cicero says we have plain, which is more like a technician, we have grand, which is more theater, and then we have a mixed. And a mixed style is a good balance of both. I'm going to convey information that's important, that needs to be straightforward, but there might be some times that I have planned something that's a little more theatrical to gain the audience's attention back or to connect with them on an emotional level. So we have these 3 different types of linguistic style. Now, let's look at those necessary elements. We have to make sure that there is appropriateness in language, that we're understanding our audience and that we're choosing words that are appropriate and not in any way outside of the expectations of what the audience feels that they're going to hear, right? That we want to be sensitive. Now, in another lesson, we're going to talk about free speech. And of course, you are free to say anything. This is the United States, and we have the First Amendment for free speech. But to be a strategic speaker, we want to be appropriate for our audience and their needs. And then, of course, accuracy and diction. Making sure that you know how to pronounce words correctly and that you're speaking in a way that is understood. So eliminating, not only just eliminating those verbal fillers that act as distractions, the likes, you knows, but diction in a way that is clear, because if we can't understand, if it's not articulated and enunciated, then the audience is missing the message altogether. So you as a speaker need to work on what are some words that might trip me up? How do I learn how to pronounce them? As you go forward in your career, anytime that you have to introduce another speaker or a guest, always need to make sure that you're going to pronounce their names correctly. And then grammatical correctness, making sure that we're using terms in the correct tense and how they are supposed to be used. So that, because anytime that you use a word incorrectly, and we're going to go into malapropism next, but anytime that you use the incorrect tense of a word or the incorrect word, that really kind of chips away at your ethos or that credibility as a speaker. And we see many, many examples of this. Now, malapropism is an act or a habit. I'm sure you've heard someone, and maybe we've all been guilty of this as well. Words that sound similar but have different meanings, and so you use the incorrect word as a substitute for the more appropriate term. So malapropism is that act or habit of misusing words almost to a ridiculous extent because those words are confusing or have a similar sound. So make sure that you're going through your speech and that you're using terms and words correctly, and that your formal sentence structure, that everything is correct grammatically as well. I'm going to post I'm going to post 2 video links, and they are embedded in this Prezi, but of course it doesn't work for me to show them on the video. So I'm going to post these links, and the first one is just bless George Bush, right? It's a YouTube video of him falling into the things that we shouldn't do, and he's grammatically, he's misusing words, has malapropism, he mispronounces things, but it's a wonderful example of realizing how far those mistakes go toward dashing the speaker's credibility. And this is the video that I'm going to post. Now, this is just kind of funny. It's very short. You'll enjoy it. You'll get a good laugh. To be fair to all parties, and I try to be equal opportunity, showing videos that will resonate with my audience. But what I am going to do is I'm going to ask that in lab, your lab instructors show you Ronald Reagan. And of course, Ronald Reagan was known as the great communicator. He had an acting background, which of course worked in his favor, not only in delivery, how he delivered a good line, and the way he did use strategic pauses, but in the speech creation itself, the words that he used. I'm going to get them to show you his address to the nation about the Challenger and that disaster. But I want to give you a little context before they do that. The Challenger was in 1986, and the audience, the last lesson we just talked about was audience analysis. The audience was nationwide, and it was school children, because this was the first time that they had taken a civilian up into space. And it was Krista McAuliffe, and she was a school teacher, had entered a national competition to be one of the crew on the Challenger. And so on this day in 1986, school children from the age of kindergarten through high schoolers were all glued to television sets in their schools watching this at the same time. And the liftoff happened at about 9 a.m. So across the nation, school children are watching this, and of course parents are watching this, and there's a lot of national attention because of this civilian. And there were 7 members of the crew on the Challenger. But in this video, it shows you that almost immediately, about a minute after the Challenger lifts off, there's an explosion, and they realize shortly afterwards that the shuttle has exploded, and of course there are no survivors. Now, that evening was supposed to be the president's address to the nation, his annual address, and instead he scrapped that whole speech, and he had a day to come up with, of course he had a speechwriter, but to come up with a speech that was really more of a eulogy to the nation. And in this eulogy, he does two things brilliantly, and you can see this in this example. First of all, he addresses each of the different types of members in his audience: the school children, the workers at NASA and the tragedy and how it affects them, the members of the families that have had someone lost because they were crew members of this shuttle. And so he does a beautiful job of audience analysis. He pronounces each of the crew members' names beautifully, but he also eulogizes, and the words that he uses, the words that he chooses to use, evoke a lot of emotion, national pride, in this sad occasion, but pride, understanding that the people on this shuttle were explorers. And so his tone and his words were very symbolic in how he chooses this. And it's only about a 5-minute video, but I want you as a lab to watch this together and to pick out the ways in which he is using words symbolically to evoke different emotions for the different members of audience, and as an overall address to celebrating the life, but also recognizing this tragedy. And as we move forward for your persuasive speech, I know that you're going to gather all of that research, go through those components of that rhetorical canon, that invention, getting the topic, going through the arrangement, problem, cause, solution, understanding how you're going to create or craft logically that argument, doing the research, remembering that all of that is like that branch, that trunk of that tree, right? That's your solid argument. But then go back and think about the language choices that you're going to make that are going to connect with your audience and that are going to make some kind of vivid appeals as well, so that you are more effective as a persuasive speaker.